evening, everyone. On behalf of the team at HR at 8 p.m., I welcome you all to the 21st and concluding episode of ABCDE Season 2. During the Season 2, we were served with 21 different perspectives on Friday evenings on academia, business, consulting, development, and entrepreneurship, starting from May 2020. Season 1 was from April 5th till May, and there were 21 knowledge sharing sessions held every evening all the way till the lockdown days. These sessions for both the seasons have been the brainchild of Indranil Banerjee and a group of dedicated volunteers of HR at 8 p.m. The topic for today is building sustainable businesses in the post-COVID era. Our expert speaker is Srikant Sastri. Srikant has been instrumental in promoting an ecosystem for entrepreneurship amongst our youth. This is exactly what our nation needs at the moment to create more jobs and become the leader in innovation. While this season may end today, the season for sustainable business will flourish from here on. He will be introduced shortly by our moderator, Mr. Surajit Sen. Surajit is a globally certified HR professional, PHR. He worked with ACC for 34 years and handled HR and IR responsibilities successfully. He enjoys working with people, through people, and for the people. We need more such people who have democratized the definition and applied to real on-the-ground action. His priorities have always been performance, integrity, equity, and concern for weaker sections in the neighborhood. Post his superannuation, he keeps himself busy with HR consulting. Before I turn over the floor to Surajit, I would like to inform you that this session is being recorded. In order to keep the background noise to a minimum, the mics have been put on mute and the moderator will take up questions on your behalf. Please keep writing in the chat box. In case you want to ask the question yourself, please raise your hand and your mic will be unmuted. I'll be summing up after the Q&A round is over. Over to you, Surajit, to conduct the session.
Good evening, all. Thanks, Atul ji, for the introduction, and to HR at 8 p.m. team led by Indranil Banerjee for giving me this opportunity to moderate this session. I feel privileged and honored. On behalf of HR at 8 p.m., I heartily welcome today's distinguished speaker, Mr. Srikant Sastri, host Mr. Atul Bhatnagar, founder Indranil, and all the professionals participating in these today's sessions. Today, Mr. Sastri will be talking to us on building sustainable businesses in the post-COVID era. The subject matter is very appropriate and relevant as our nation is struggling to rebuild our economy, facing various challenges due to non-availability of vaccine yet, low GDP, large-scale unemployment, high inflation, lack of investments, and overall aggressive neighbors, so on and so forth. With this background, we will be listening Mr. Sastri to understand how to create sustainable business models amidst these challenges. I think HR at 8 p.m. team for selecting such an appropriate topic and speaker in this evening. Before I proceed further, I would like to introduce Mr. Srikant Sastri, today's eminent speaker on the subject. Mr. Sastri is an engineering graduate from IIT Kanpur and management graduate from IIM Calcutta. Post-qualification, he had worked with Unilever India and McCann Erickson as CEO. He is a seasoned entrepreneur who has built and exited 2 successful ventures that have 2,000 employees, 2,000 plus employees, and 15,000 plus employees respectively. This I am giving emphasis, I being an HR professional. So what I want to stress here is Mr. Sastri is a big entrepreneur who has employed such large number of employees. He has co-founded Crayon Data, the ambitious Singapore and India-based artificial intelligence startup, and started the Chalo Startup Initiative. Through 10 web episodes based on series of real startups, he is distilling 10 key lessons to would-be entrepreneurs. He is an innovation expert, currently serving as chairman of IIM Calcutta Innovation Park and chairman of I3G Advisory Network. I would like to mention here I3G means innovation, incubation, investment and growth. As an active, he is also an active charter member, and as active charter member of TAI, the Indus Entrepreneurs Delhi, an Indian angel network, Mr. Sastri supports several incubators across India. So basically, Mr. Sastri is helping our nation in rebuilding our nation, the youth, so that they can start up with new initiatives, reskilling and all those things he is doing. His specialties are global customer and investor relationship, mentoring and scaling, merger and acquisition, entrepreneurship, solving India-specific challenges through business ideas and CSR. When I asked him this morning how he keeps himself on what are the activities, he says three things these days keeps him busy. One is innovation, other one is education. He goes to Ashoka University regularly over there, and then he spends a lot of time in mentoring and scaling young entrepreneurs, which is really commendable job. He says he is not a specialist because of his humbleness. He says I am a jack of all trades but master of none. But I find that he is a teacher, and we really we respect to his kind of innovation, the kind of like mentoring he is doing, the kind of mentorship he is doing for the startup company entrepreneurs to come up and other. And I really feel great to introduce him to this August gathering session. With this brief incomplete introduction, I don't think this is a complete introduction, but what I have ventured. I once again welcome and invite Mr. Sastri to enlighten us with his thoughts on the subject. Once Mr. Sastri completes his address, there will be a question hour session. Participants may write, which I think already Mr. Bhatnagar has repeated. They can write their questions on chat box and raise their hands to ask directly. Over to Mr. Sastri, and we are very eager to listen to him.
So first of all, Indranil da, Surajit da, and Atul, apna ke onek dhanyabad for inviting me here today. You already spoken about the theme. I know that HR at 8 p.m. gets participants from across the country. So I'd like to wish you in as many languages as possible, including Jule, which is in Ladakh, and Kurumjari, which is in Manipur, Vanakkam in Chennai, and Namaskar in Bengal. While the theme of this topic is HR at 8 p.m., for me personally, I would say the theme has been redefined for many years now as HR at 24/7. That's because I'm married to a successful HR professional myself, and therefore I'm surrounded by HR all the time. So I'm treating this as HR at 24/7. Now, I want to do a quick poll just to understand the flavor of the participants, the kind of organization you represent, and we'll do the poll in a slightly different way. To go to this site called menti.com, menti.com, since all of you are online, it's very easy to go to menti.com on your phone or your laptop, and it'll ask you for a code. You can put down the code 9340943. Go to menti.com, enter this code, and then it'll ask you a multiple choice question. What is the best way to describe the organization you represent? The options are large corporate, SME, startup, self-employed, or other. So this is a very, very easy tool to use. So I don't think any one of you should have a problem. Just go to menti.com, enter this code, and pick one of the choices. So I'm just trying to get a flavor for the kind of organizations you represent. Okay, so far it's a mix of large corporate, startup, self-employed. let me proceed from here because in the interest of time. So the reason I asked you this question was because I did a poll recently in preparation for the session, and I reached out to about 20 CEOs from SMEs and startups, and I asked them, how did COVID and the lockdown change your business trajectory? And I gave them 5 options: very adversely affected, somewhat adversely affected, temporary impact, discovered some new opportunities and new ways of working, and we're now on a whole new trajectory of growth. You'll see an interesting pie chart here. The bottom 2 slices, red and blue, show that 45% of them were either very adversely affected or somewhat adversely affected. But on the top 2 slices, green and purple, that was also 45%. They discovered new opportunities, new ways of working, or they moved into a whole new trajectory of growth. So the equally divided split, and there is a small 10% which said temporary impact, but we're now back on pre-COVID trajectory. So you can see that, like everything else in today's world, whether in US or India, this is completely polarized, the opinion. Now, one of the friends whom I asked, he's a CEO. So I sent him a message on WhatsApp saying, which of these 5 options would you pick? He said, I won't pick an option. Let me send you a screen. It's a listed company. He sent me a screenshot of his share price. It's a liquor company called Globus Spirits. And if you look at the share price from February 2020 to October 2020, it's an upward graph. So clearly, for an alcoholic spirits company, the market has been very, very kind. So therefore, different people have had different experiences during COVID. I want to do a second poll very quickly. The question this time is, use one word to describe your feelings. How do you feel about the future of your business or organization in the post-COVID era? Use one word to describe whatever comes to your mind. One answer: frustrating. Not surprising at all. But let's see the mix of encouraging, exact opposite, secured, wonderful, good, growth. We've got 5 responses. So once again, you see a good spread of responses ranging from frustrating to encouraging to good to secured to growth. So people have diverse views about what the future looks like in the post-COVID era. This is a good flavor for what in general people believe, so I will not spend more time on this. Fortunately, what happened with me was during COVID, I got to spend time on 3 very interesting projects in 3 different sectors or industries. One of the projects I was involved was in the medical device category. The second one was in FMCG, and third one was in online education. So the first one, medical device, I was a pro bono leader of a task force that helped to create the medical device. Online education company, I was formerly an advisor. And in the FMCG company, I'm a board member. So 3 very diverse experiences. So without getting into details of all of this, I'm going to spend more time on the first one, medical device, where a company launched a new product during COVID in a completely new category for them. And that is where I want to spend some time. Atul knows the story, so he might find the repetition a bit boring, but hopefully the rest of you will find it interesting. How did it start? On day 2 of lockdown 1.0, I got a call from this professor at IIT Kanpur, Professor Amitabu Bandyopadhyay. He called me. He's in charge of the startup incubator at IIT Kanpur. He called me and said, I need your help because in response to the Prime Minister and government's clarion call asking for IITs and other engineering colleges to come forward and help with products and solutions to fight COVID. He said, I sent out this message to all our incubated startups, and these 2 young boys have come forward. They are running a robotics company, but they now say they want to make a ventilator to fight COVID. So I said, okay, let me talk to them. So I started talking to these 2 young boys over WhatsApp, and they sent me a video which said, this is the invasive ventilator which is needed for corona patient. We made this prototype today. We'll make some changes. It'll be done in the next 5 to 6 days. It is portable, can be run on battery. We developed this only yesterday and we can make this work for sure. So I was very intrigued, obviously, because these are two young bright boys who said we made a ventilator in such short period of time. So I said, send me some more details. So they sent me this 3-dimensional drawing, which you can see has now, I passed out of IIT Kanpur as an engineer, chemical engineer, 3.5 decades ago. But I've forgotten all my engineering because I've never worked in an engineering job. But I did my best. I studied the internet to understand this 3D drawing. I could see pumps, sensors, solenoid valves, etc., etc. I finally made sense of it. Then I told them, tell me more. So they sent me an initial working prototype, a small video. So they said, look, this is how it works. So you can see an artificial lung being simulated there, and the ventilator is pumping air into it. So they sent me this video of a very, very early initial prototype, actually. So I was clearly very intrigued by this. So I started studying about what is ventilator. I'd never learned about a ventilator before. So I learned that there are two kinds of ventilators. There is something known as a non-invasive ventilator, where basically what happens in the case of COVID, as all of us know, your lungs become weak. So they need help in breathing. So one kind of ventilator is called non-invasive ventilator, where quite simply it's like a mask on your face. The word non-invasive means that nothing goes inside your body. So there's a mask on your face and air gets pumped in through your nose. There's another kind of ventilator which is called an invasive ventilator. This is in more serious cases where the body needs much more help. So there's a tube that goes right through the breathing canal into your lungs and takes the air inside. That's why it's called invasive. So having understood all this, what I and the professor did was we assembled first thing I said is, let's create a WhatsApp group. We created a WhatsApp group called India Overcomes COVID. And we assembled a group of 20 experts. And on March 29th, we held our first task force meeting over Zoom. And as you can see that there are 20 people here. The task force is interesting because it had a right mix of experts. There were 4 CEOs from medical technology industry. There was 1 supply chain expert. There was 1 manufacturing expert. There was 1 Padma Shri, 1 Padma Bhushan. And there was a group of young people from IIT Kanpur's incubator, apart from the 2 boys from the company who had made the ventilator. And this task force came together to set an ambitious objective, saying we are going to make it happen during COVID. And for the next 82 days non-stop, there was a 12 noon Zoom call every day without fail, including Sundays. And at 12 noon, we would meet for 90 minutes, thrash out every issue, make progress, and continue the conversation rest of the day over phone, email, WhatsApp, etc. By doing this, we made rapid progress. Within 82 days, we had a product ready, not just a prototype, a product which had been tested by doctors. So you see the picture here with a well-known intensivist or a doctor who's in charge of the ICU in a well-known hospital in Pune, who tested the product, validated it. We did the same thing at hospitals like Medanta and Fortis in Delhi and some government hospitals. The product was ready, and in 82 days, it was manufactured and ready. And just for context, the normal development cycle for a product high-end invasive ventilator like this is 18 to 24 months. But given the pressure of COVID, this could be done in 82 days because a group of very highly experienced experts came together, worked in record time without cutting any corners, and this product was in the market in 82 days. Now, I want to spend a few minutes talking about what made this project a success, because 82 days is remarkable. So one of the members, contributing members to this task force, is the global R&D head for a well-known medical device company in US. He's an Indian origin person. He said he's never seen anything like this before, but this is going to be a model for the future. So what we learned in COVID is likely to become a model for the future. So what made this project a success? I have 7 answers here to share with you. The first one, before I talk about the specific, this picture that you see is of the 2001 Junior Hockey World Cup winning Indian team. The picture is slightly old, that's why you can see the hazy picture. But this win was important because, as you know, Indian hockey does not win too many global titles for the last 40 years. This was one of those rare international trophy wins, and it was a very proud team. By the way, the team had gone in with a lot of training, great expectations, great potential. But here's what happened. In one of the the captain was Gagan Ajit Singh, the coach was Rajinder Singh. One of the early pool matches, in spite of all the preparation, India lost to Australia. The team was very dejected and they were about to give up hope. The coach, Rajinder Singh, called all the players together and said, if you can't win the next match against Netherlands, there can never be a revival of Indian hockey. That was the message he gave them. Suddenly the team was energized and charged up. They had found a higher purpose, a national cause, the revival of Indian hockey. They went ahead. The next match, they beat Netherlands 4-3. After that, they beat Germany 3-2 in semi-finals. And 6-1, they beat Argentina in the finals and came back with the trophy. So just like this team was energized by a higher purpose to win the trophy, in our case, the task force was also united by a higher purpose, which is to help India fight COVID during a crisis situation. So that was the reason number 1 for success. Related to this, I call it reason 1A, is that it's great to have a bigger purpose, but it must lead to a bold vision also. So in our case, the vision was that we need a world-class ventilator ready for deployment by July at an affordable price, and that ventilator must be able to fight COVID-19. Now, this was a bold vision because to do it under 90 days was a bold vision. So that was the second lesson we learned. You have to have a big, high purpose, but that needs to get translated into a bold vision, which is action-oriented. It's great to have a vision. How do you translate into action? Now, if you look at us as a country, we find it very difficult to manage our day-to-day issues. Our traffic is a mess, pollution is a mess, our primary education system is in a mess. Routine things we don't do very well. But if you look at the space mission on the left, we do a great job. Managing millions of pilgrims at Mahakumbh, we do a great job. So anytime as a country we come together in a mission mode, we do a wonderful job. So in our case also at the task force, we came together in a mission mode by saying we will meet every day 12 noon, look at what needs to be done, remove every bottleneck from the way and make regular progress. So mission mode is lesson number 2. Now mission mode is great, but you do run into problems down the line. Go back to the 2007 Bollywood successful movie Chak De India. Shah Rukh Khan is the coach of Indian women's hockey team who go into the World Cup as complete underdogs, but they see success. How does Shah Rukh Khan manage it? In the initial few matches, his strategy is to use this tiny little girl from Haryana, rural Haryana, who's so fast that she goes through opponents and scores goals. That strategy works in the initial stages. But they run into the South Koreans in one of the matches. The South Koreans use a man-to-man marking strategy in that match. Shah Rukh Khan's strategy does not work in counter to that. So what he does is, he pulls in one of his senior players who has been on the bench so far. He calls her because he knows she can demolish the South Koreans' man-to-man marking strategy. That player comes in and completely demolishes the South Korean man-to-man marking strategy, and India wins the match. So every match, there is an agility, an agile iteration that's done, and which is what we did in the task force, because when we met at 12 noon every day over a Zoom call, we would take stock. What are the problems we're running into? How do we overcome those? How do we change our strategy for the future? And every day we would have agile iterations and keep moving forward. So this is the success reason number 3. The other one is all about people. Particularly in Calcutta and certainly all over India, we all remember the terrible period from 2005 to 7 when Greg Chappell was the coach of the Indian cricket team. Not only did he sack Saurav Ganguly, but he demoralized the entire team. Sachin Tendulkar has gone on record to say that Greg Chappell behaved like a ringmaster and he has set back Indian cricket by 5 years. Complete contrast to that is the next coach, foreign coach who came in, Gary Kirsten. His style was completely different, non-hierarchical, constructive. He used a light touch to support his players. He was not overbearing. He was not destructive. India went on to win the 2011 World Cup with Gary Kirsten as the coach. The players were so grateful, they carried him around on their shoulders around Wankhede Stadium. So we had a similar approach in our task force. We had a diverse age group. The youngest member of the task force was a 23-year-old young IIT engineer. The oldest was a 74-year-old successful businessman who's a Padma Shri. That is the age span. But when we worked together, it was non-hierarchical. People treated each other as equal. It was collaborative. It was constructive. So that was success reason number 4. Number 5, again an example from cricket, is what happens when you bring people together. They learn from each other. There is osmosis. There is collaboration. Take David Warner as an example. He made his international debut as a ODI and T20 player in 2009. 2009 to 2011, he was not in the Australian Test team at all. But he was playing the IPL in India when, and this is a story I heard from Harsha Bhogle who told me, he said, Virendra Sehwag, who was also in the Delhi Daredevils IPL team, along with Warner, told Warner one day, you will make a good test cricketer one day, you should give it a shot. Warner said, how is it possible? I'm not even a good test player. Sehwag said, reason 1, 2, 3, why you will make a good test player. The rest is history. 2011, Warner made his test debut, and today he's a very good test player also. How did that happen? Because of osmosis during IPL. When you put together a large group of talented people together, they learn from each other. There is osmosis, and that's how everyone goes back enriched. So even in the case of a ventilator task force, when 20 people are meeting every day, day after day, they're learning from each other. The older people learn from the younger people learn from the older people, and so on and so forth. So therefore, this was the other reason for success. People learned and the learning kept improving, and that helped the entire ventilator project. Reason number 6, this time I'm going to borrow from Bollywood. Again, we've seen hockey, we've seen cricket, now it's the turn of Bollywood. The picture on the right is of a beautiful place in Himachal Pradesh called Chitkul. It's just 90 kilometers from the China border. It's the last point in India where you can travel without a permit. The river is called the Baspa River. So director Imtiaz Ali, who you see on the left side with the long hair, he told me about the story of what happened when he shot the film Love Aajkal at this location. So he was shooting for Love Aajkal in 2019 at this place called Chitkul. It was about to be sunset, and he wanted to take a shot with his stars, Kartik Aaryan and Sara Ali Khan, and they were supposed to shoot on the river bank. Imtiaz Ali, as the leader and the director, spotted a small island in the middle of the river, and he felt that if he kept his camera on that island, he would get a much better shot. But there was no way of getting to the island. So Imtiaz Ali rolled up his trousers and started wading through the river. And his crew realized that the director had made up his mind and was taking the initiative himself. They followed suit. They put boulders and rocks in the river, just like the Vanar Sena did in Ramayana, and they waded through the water with the equipment on their shoulder, went to the island, took the shot, came back before sunset. So in this case, the director led from the front and achieved success. So even in our task force, although they were very accomplished people, They were not talkers. They were all doers. They were taking steps, even though they were very experienced people. The person who's the Padma Bhushan was taking the lead in sourcing difficult components from across the world when there was a lockdown. So everyone rolled up their sleeves and was leading from the front. The final tip, the final reason for success was the remarkable engagement we had with the government. Completely unexpected, but the government actually delivered. You'll see a flight number called SQ406 and SQ423 in this. Here's what happens. That's a Singapore Airlines flight. So we had to make ventilators, the initial prototype. This is 9th of April is the date you'll see there. India was under lockdown. Our consignment had to come via Singapore. Singapore was under lockdown. No flights, no courier, no freight services. The government of India stepped in. The Ministry of External Affairs spoke to the Indian High Commission in Singapore and said, can you do something? The Indian High Commission in Singapore figured out that there was an empty Singapore Airlines flight coming from Singapore to Bombay to take back stranded Singaporeans from India to Singapore. They said, we will send this consignment of yours in that empty flight. And that consignment came with the help of government, and we could make our ventilators. So that was reason number 7 why we could succeed. So if I took all these 7 reasons, they actually become operating principles that can be applied to all businesses in the post-COVID era. 1, you need a higher purpose and bold vision. Any kind of company, whether you're a large corporate or an SME or a startup, your mission cannot be just about making money. It has to be about making difference to society, to the country, to the world. And if that higher purpose and bold vision is understood by all the team members, they're all charged up and energized. That has to get translated into action by working in a mission mode, by doing agile iterations. Then the team dynamics. The people have to work together without regard to hierarchy. They have to collaborate with each other, learn from each other using osmosis, and everyone, however senior, has to be leading from the front. Even the generals have to become foot soldiers when needed. And finally, every company has to learn to engage the organized government effectively. So those operating principles, if you apply, success is assured. And for me personally, the big learning was from COVID that when I look at the future, nothing is a constraint. Time, space, expertise is no longer a constraint. You can do things much faster. Time is not a constraint. You can get expert advice and team members anywhere in the world, just like we are doing today over a Zoom call. Location and space is not a constraint. Expertise is not a constraint. And therefore, bold, accelerated growth for companies or for a country like India is no longer a dream. That's the big learning for me. Now, imagine the possibilities. I know that there is at least 1 or 2 startups on this call. There is a huge opportunity opening up for startups. You can actually now imagine that Silicon Valley can get reinvented in India. Why do I say that about the post-COVID era? Because what is Silicon Valley after all? What is the secret mantra there? It's a small area, 121 square kilometers, that's all. Why is Silicon Valley so great? Merely because there are a lot of talented people from universities, from startups, who are together working in cafes and bars, sharing ideas. Investors are willing to give them money and mentoring. It's all because they're in great proximity. But now in the post-COVID era, geographical proximity does not matter. A friend of mine who's a Silicon Valley veteran said, the advantage of Silicon Valley is completely gone now, because in the post-COVID era, people don't want to meet each other. They're only interacting remotely. If you're interacting remotely, how does it matter whether you're in Silicon Valley or Dehradun or Nigeria? So this is an opportunity for countries like India to catch up and leapfrog, which is why I believe that we have a chance to reinvent Silicon Valley in India, in places like Kolkata or anywhere else in India, which have had a disadvantage so far. I spoke, and this is true for large corporates also, who are now reinventing themselves. 2 CEOs told me this. The first CEO is a CEO, MD of a 1600 crore listed company. He told me that to succeed in the post-COVID era, your brand has to be very powerful. Why does he say that? Because your brand is powerful. Customers want to buy from you. Your dealers want to do business with you. Neither customers nor dealers want to take the risk of working with unknown companies. So if you build a brand, you become a known company. And therefore, that is the way to if you're a large company, it's important for you to build a brand, to be seen as safe, to be seen as reassuring. Another CEO of a global company, $3.5 billion of revenue, he told me that, look, we have always been client focused, but now our employees want us to have a longer term purpose, which is much higher, much more than making money. They want to know talent wants to work in companies which have a higher purpose. So since this group is full of HR people, it's important for HR people to go and make this transformation in their company, convince the CEOs that we need to be something more than just a money-making machine. We need to have a higher purpose, and we need to set audacious goals for ourselves. So therefore, my conclusion from my experience is that there is hope beyond COVID. This can actually be a chance to create history and chart a completely new path for ourselves. And I'd like to thank you for this time and wish you best of luck. And I hope you traverse a similar path as well. So with that, I am at the end of my presentation. I will stop sharing my slides and happy to take questions.
Indranil, do you like to ask him directly?
No, you just read it out, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Mr. Sastri, it's a question from Indranil. He says, sir, how the HR could create its own brand, leaving behind corporate branding?
So I'm trying to interpret your question, Indranil. Companies, of course, have to build their own brand because they have to deal with customers and other stakeholders like investors. But HR can build its own brand and make a name for itself by showing the way in terms of telling the company leadership that we must have a higher purpose, much more beyond just making money. And if you take the lead in identifying that higher purpose, sharing it with the employees, I think that would be a great way for HR to build its brand. The other is to convince your management that in this new way of working, hierarchy is less important. There may be someone with an MD title and someone with a management trainee title, but the old have a lot to learn from young. The young ones are the ones who know new technologies, new trends, etc. So reducing hierarchy, encouraging collaboration, encouraging osmosis. So HR should look at what are the HR practices, the organizational structure, the organizational transformation that can lead to all that. If HR takes the lead on all these fronts, I can assure you that HR will build a brand for itself.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I have a small question. Another question, rather. You are into angel consulting, and so far I don't know whether the information is right or wrong. It is understood that almost more than 90% startups, experience the failure. We talk about the success stories, fine, but at the same time, large populations of investors are also having negative, going south end. So, what is the learning from the failure experience? Number one,
Right.
And for a startup organizations, normally the HR is a, not a, prominent thing to look into, because at that time, when developing business and being success is the mantra altogether. So how do you collaborate these things? Because there are huge kind of startup which experience failure, but maybe due to this kind of thing, the organization structures wise or organization process wise, there might be some deficiency. And as I said, that HR might not be the kind of prominence that is there. So what is your take, sir, on this?
So, Indranil, there were two parts to your question. One is there is so much of failure in startups and what can we run from the failure? And second is what role can HR play? There are two parts to your question. And
Absolutely,
I'll take
sir.
both
Yes,
parts. So, well, you're right. There is 80% failure. But my point is that unless 100 people try a startup, those 20 great successes will not happen. And the reason the failure is because all startups are charting a very pioneering path. They're trying to do things that have never been done before. And when you try and be a pioneer and do things that have never been done before, there is always a risk of failure, a very high risk of failure. So it needs courage to go down that path, and therefore failure, that quantum of failure is inevitable. That said, I mean, the famous story that all of us have heard about Thomas Alva Edison, the number of times he uh, failed before he succeeded, shows that the greatest inventions have happened only when people are comfortable with the idea of failure. Now, there's a cultural issue here. In India, failure carries a stigma. People say, "वो तो fail हो गया." But in successful entrepreneurial societies like the US, failure is celebrated, saying this person tried to do something different. No matter he failed, he will succeed the next time. So I think there's a cultural journey that we have to traverse in India. So that's one part of it. Now, you've had a point that HR may not have a role to play in the initial part of the company. Now, that's not really true, because some of the best startups create a good company culture at a very early stage. And that is what powers their growth very often. It's not just their idea. It is the power of a great company culture that lets people work together and achieve success. So HR has a big role to play in creating that initial culture. And therefore, I would disagree with you when you say HR does not have a role to play in the initial stages. Enlightened startups will focus on this. Some may not.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So there is one question from Sri Radhakrishnan. She says, during the 82 days project, were there conflicts amidst your 20-member team? If so, how was it sorted out? First of all, yeah.
Sure. So, Ushashri, great question. Now, I would say there were some conflicts, but not major. The reason there were not many conflicts was because everyone was working against a very, very sharp and tight deadline. And therefore, people were completely focused on doing what they needed to. There were disagreements, certainly, on the approach and strategy. But because we were doing our 12 noon calls every day, people were very open and frank with each other. So there were many heated and debates happening on those calls. But issues got thrashed out. Nothing was brushed under the carpet and no politics was played. And therefore, there were no conflicts that were being played behind the scenes. These are all open debates and discussions happening and issues getting resolved. I completely recognize. So this is like a wartime, right? But it is in peacetime, when people have a lot of time on their hands and minds are idle. That is when conflicts remain unresolved. But the reason so the mission mode that I spoke about, when you work in a mission mode, and you may not meet every day as we did, but you should, in a mission mode, meet twice a week or once a week. And those meetings or those discussions have to be thorough. They have to be transparent. You resolve the issues. Once you do that, conflicts can go away. But having said that, one of the roles that me and the professor played as co-leaders of the task force was that after that daily call, we would talk to all the other members if required, over phone, over email, over WhatsApp after the call. So if there were any unresolved issues, we would resolve that. So the conflict resolution mechanism was the two of us as leaders using back channels to resolve it, but otherwise as many issues as possible were resolved during the daily 12 noon call itself.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
So the next question is from Chatterjee. He says, for survival of a company, it should have a strong R&D and T&D. In post-COVID period, companies are struggling for survival. Do you think post-COVID there will be growth in industry?
Yeah, so Anando, so you saw in the poll that I did with 20 CEOs, you saw in the audience poll that we did here, opinion is divided. There is a 40 to 50% of people or leaders who believe that growth is possible. They believe that COVID has brought out new opportunities. Some industries which were growing slowly in the past have suddenly growing very fast. Whether it is entertainment things like online OTT, Netflix and Amazon Prime, whether it is e-commerce, whether it is healthcare, whether it is online education. So many industries have got the benefit of growth. But even outside of that, I think people have realized new ways of working. People have realized that working in an online mode takes away many inefficiencies. For example, I used to travel 3 days a week last year, every week. Now all that work is getting done on the phone and Zoom, and I have a lot of time in my hands. So there are many benefits that have come, side benefits, unexpected benefits out of COVID, and therefore I think growth is possible. Also, R&D and T&D investments, I think are still doable, because R&D now is actually less expensive for the last 5 years, because group of young people working together, you don't need to invest massive amounts in infrastructure. Technologies like digital, cloud, etc., make technology R&D much more less expensive now. Likewise, on L&D, training and development, I have seen so many companies move to the online model or virtual model for training and development. And therefore, I think we are all innovative and imaginative, so we find answers to overcome some of these short-term challenges. But I'm personally very, very optimistic about the growth actually.
Startups have unique culture, innovation, and even failures are celebrated. Would you be able to share examples of large corporations who are building flatter structure and encourage innovation? So he's asking for some example of larger corporation.
Sure. So, Avni, I had put up towards the end of my presentation two statements from two CEOs of large companies. The statement on the right side that you saw, which was from a $3.5 billion large company, the CEO is an Indian. So he was telling me how he encourages innovation. He uses a technique called reverse learning. Reverse learning. Basically, what happens is it's the younger generation, people in their 20s, who are more adept and familiar with new technologies, new innovation. People who are in the 40s and 50s are not abreast of new technologies. So what the CEO does, he's in his late 50s. A few times a week, he fixes up appointments with younger members in the company. He has some 100,000 employees across the world. He fixes up appointments with younger employees who are in their 20s and tells them, you have to mentor me. Reverse mentoring, reverse learning. So he tells one of the employees who he knows is good at artificial intelligence, teach me that topic. Someone else is good at another subject. He says, teach me that topic. So the humility to keep learning is what drives innovation in these companies. That's one of the techniques actually. So I think that's one example of what a large company is doing to encourage innovation. You spoke about building flatter structures also, Avni. Now, here's what he did. He did something remarkable when he took over as CEO some years ago. It was a global company. Most of the customers are in US and Europe, but they were headquartered in Gurgaon. And headquarters in Gurgaon, so he made a decision saying all the senior managers have to move away from headquarters and be as close to the market and customers as possible. So his entire top management moved out of India to wherever the customers were, US, Europe, etc., saying, look, we have to be closer to our customers. And so head office remained only for functions which are back office functions. A few years ago, he abolished the head office concept itself. He's saying, I don't want levels, head office, regional office, zonal office, local office, all that is gone. We will all be spread out. We will reduce the number of layers in terms of offices, be as close to our customers as possible because they are the ones who give us our revenues. So that was one of the ways he got a flatter structure. So I can't name the company because of confidentiality, but it is a live example of me.
Thank you, sir. I think it really makes sense. And apart from the wonderful stories that you shared during your presentation, I think this also gives us input in terms of what we can take back for our organizations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'm glad it helped.
Sir, one more question from Sujay Datta. He says, why do most companies still look at China for parts and components for their products? Key components are still not available in India. European components push companies out of contention price-wise.
So, Sujay, your facts are right that key components are not available in India. European components are expensive. Companies still look at China. I'll give you our experience during the ventilator project. because we were making a world-class ventilator, we needed components which were available either in China, Europe, or US, or Taiwan. And the reason we had to do that was the volume of ventilators produced in India is not very large in the past. We make 8,000, 9,000 ventilators per annum. At that volume, it is not practical for every component to be made in India, just doesn't make sense. So some of the components, you can import the components, but the important thing is how much of the value addition on top of that are you doing in India? The software that runs it, the integration, that's what matters. So I'm less worried about components being imported. But that said, where do you import components from? There is a big move to reduce the dependence on China, both because of the geopolitical condition, also because of quality. I'll give you an example. There was always a suspicion that Chinese components have a quality issue, and we faced that challenge. And initially, because Chinese components were easily available, we imported it in April, May. But then we realized very quickly there were quality issues. We replaced it, and some of the Chinese companies did something which was very nasty. The initial samples they sent you were very good quality. You placed an order, when the full consignment came, it was a poor quality. So those are things we learned, and then we moved to European and US components. So those are more expensive, but when you look at the overall price of a product, including the software you write and value addition you do, the component price matters much less. What is more important is to produce a very high quality product which has an international market. But people are moving away from China gradually. It will not happen overnight. And nor is it practical to make every component in India, because it's just not worthwhile at this stage. At some stage, it will make sense. Take the automobile industry. India produces a large number of automobiles, so you can produce automobile components in India. So the moment the market is big, you will automatically start creating components in India. But right now, Atmanirbhar Bharat, I've spoken to people in the government, does not mean you produce every component in India. It means that you're self-reliant in as many aspects as possible, but does not mean 100% indigenization.
Thank you so much for this presentation.
You're welcome.
It was very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome, Sujoy.
Next, sir, we have one more question from Arijit Chandra Majumdar. Do you think crisis is the best time for innovation?
Arijit, you're right. Crisis brings out the best in everyone. It definitely drives innovation. But I asked the same question to several CEOs, and I asked them, how will you replicate? In COVID time, you took emergency measures. How will you replicate that in normal times when people become complacent? He said, in normal times, we have to create, in peace times, we have to create war-like situations. So I said, what do you mean? How will you do it? So he said, I'll give you an example. He said, they provide accounting services to their customers. And normally in the past, their aim has been to close the books of accounts for their client within a certain number of weeks of the financial year end. He's saying, I'm now going to set a target, saying if earlier it was taking 8 weeks, you must now finish it in 4 weeks. Or if earlier you were doing it in 4 weeks, you must now do it in 2 weeks. He's saying, if we set a challenging target which is bold enough, and you put a competent team to work on a mission mode, and you create a sense of urgency, people will work towards it. People will find answers. So set challenging goals, empower people, create groups of people who can work in a mission mode. Then in that situation, innovation will happen even in normal times.
Very true, sir. Very true.
Srikant, I had 2 questions. Surajit, if I may.
Yeah, please.
One is, how do we change this culture among startups, which is the current one, which is basically on the higher purpose seems to be valuation and funding. And we need to change that line of thinking, because right now success is being more advertised. Look how much funding you've raised, how many rounds, whatever be the other metrics going with, which is very money related. The second question is, look, I also see that some of these startups have come up with problem statements which are may not be real problems. So they have thought of and brought that up. On the other hand, there are some real life problems. I happened to be in Rajouri in J&K last year, and the general there was talking of there are nearly 150 problem statements which the Indian Army, all the Indian Armed Forces have put out. And they want solutions for those. And in fact, one of them happened to be coming to IIT Kanpur. They wanted to have a drone which can work in those hostile areas and deliver supplies to our Jawans who are in up in the hills, and they take nearly 7 days for a mule to go up the high the incline. So they wanted a more technology related solution. So there are these problem statements. So now I've only talked about the Indian Army here, but even the corporates, Indian corporates, they can come up with problem statements, and they all have something or the other. So can we pool them together? Can we get them to work, get our graduates to work on those which are real life problems, leading to some real life solutions? And that will be, I mean, forget the innovation part. The thing is, there is a problem required, and let's solve it. That's it.
No, I think both your questions are excellent, Atul. I'll take the first one first. How do you get the startups to look at a higher purpose and not chase valuation? I have a simple word of advice for any startups that I engage with. I tell them, stop reading Economic Times, stop watching CNBC or Your Story, because those are the ones who celebrate high valuation. So please stop reading it immediately. Focus on frugality, focus on frugal innovation. Particularly being in India, you can build a startup with a very limited amount of money. Unfortunately, valuations and fundraisers have got glorified. So I think this requires constant reinforcement of a message that focus on building a good product that serves a real need and not on valuation. So this one requires a constant reinforcement. The second one, fortunately now a lot of work is happening in terms of identifying real problem statements and circulating it to startups. For example, at IIT Kanpur, of which both you and I are alumnus, about 3 months ago, we took 4 sectors: education, healthcare, agriculture, and one more. And we actually floated a large mission to gather as many problem statements as possible. For example, in agriculture, one of the problem statements is that most marginal farmers in India have less than 1 acre of land. How do you modernize agriculture in such small pieces of land? That is one problem statement. Second is there's so much of fruits, vegetables, and grains that perish from the journey from the farm to the store. There's so much of farm losses. What can you do to prevent that to stop them from perishing? Can you create innovative low-cost storage devices? So likewise in education, likewise in healthcare, similar problem statements were identified and people were asked to work on it. You spoke on defense. Again, your classmate or one batch senior, Ajay Kumar, who's the defense secretary, if you see the defense ministry site, over the last 2 years, they have a scheme called IDEX, which if you see, they've identified 12 categories of problems that they've invited startups to work on. So fortunately, over the last 4 to 5 years, there's a fair bit of realization within some departments of some ministries of the government. Defense is one of them actually. Agriculture slowly going down that path. But I think there is a movement. The pace may not be fast enough, but I think both the second problem that you identified, I think there is a realization that that's the way to go actually.
Yeah, in fact, I was looking at, I mean, I'm sharing this idea with you and the larger public here, that at the 4th year or the 3rd and 4th, I mean, in our time, it was the 4th and 5th year when you used to do a BTech project, and it used to be a 1-year project, and it was literally mandatory to do that, otherwise you don't get your degree. Now, that applies to whether it's IITs or NIITs or any other engineering college. There are movements to kind of have a project done. Now, again, there the higher purpose should not be the grades.
Agreed.
It should be solving something real.
Agreed.
And that's what the problem statement should be shared with people who are passing out, and or rather who are in the 3rd year and the final year, that is. That can lead to a lot of brain work getting mobilized rather than only looking at people who have passed out and then they're looking to become entrepreneurs, etc. So let's try and inculcate entrepreneurship at the college level itself.
I totally agree with you, Atul. I think that's an effort that needs to be made.
Question is there from Sujay Datta. He says most inventions which drove the growth in the 20th century was because of World War I and II.
You're right, Sujat, but it's a larger thing. Every time there's a crisis or a problem, a lot of growth gets driven. I'll give you an example. I made my first ever trip to US in 1992. And I remember I took a domestic, and this is a story, bear with me while I explain how it is not limited to World War I and II. I was on a domestic flight within the US and I landed at Philadelphia airport, and I walked out of the plane, came to the baggage carousel, picked up my bag when I realized I had forgotten my passport wallet inside the plane itself. This was 1992. I could walk back all the way from the baggage carousel back into the plane, take my passport wallet back, and come back. No one stopped me. All that changed after 9/11. Why? Because 9/11 was a crisis for the US, and an entire new industry came up called Homeland Security. All the innovation that you see in terms of Homeland Security, uh, uh, anti-terrorism related equipment, that whole industry came up after that crisis. So every time there's a crisis, there is a new spurt of business growth that happens. It happened after the financial crisis. It will happen after COVID. After COVID, just see how the healthcare industry and medical device industry booms now, actually. So therefore, in every crisis, there is an opportunity. So World War I and World War II are much bigger in scale, and therefore it comes to our mind. But if you just look at what's happened even over the last 20 years, you'll see a lot of innovation coming after these relatively minor crises also, which are not really minor, but there have been plenty of innovation.
Yeah, I think everyone is appreciating the session. Now I'll request Mr. Bhatnagar to take over.
Thank you, Surajit. And thanks, Srikant. What a wonderful session and so lively. And what I can see from the chat box itself has been very well appreciated, your presentation style and the content both. And what I'm going to remember you and your presentation is not by the statements that were put out on the presentation, but the examples that were given. So hockey team and coach Rajendra Singh, and how that led to the team winning after a dismal start. Higher purpose, as you mentioned. Well, that's a great example to have and will keep in my mind. Second, the mission. And you talked about the space launch and the Mahakumbh. Again, just by these examples, we have read it so many times and we know about these examples, but to relate it to a change in our own management styles and to create an entrepreneurial culture, we had never thought about it. You brought that to light. So thank you very much for that. Agile iterations. We talked about Chakte and Shah Rukh Khan's interventions, and who doesn't remember that movie? But again, to apply that to a principle of entrepreneurship and how to lead entrepreneurship, it's a great example. Then about the non-hierarchical structures, and you talked about the 74-year-old Padma Bhushan awardee and a 23-year-old entrepreneur coming onto the same platform. Well, that is again an example we would like to follow more and more. And I think through this video that we are going to be making on this particular session, and the people who have witnessed this live, this can be a great example to the HR people or any other who can look at organizational structures to make a success. Then the Warner and Sehwag story about osmosis and collaboration. Next time I'm going to watch Warner, I'll have something more to think about him. Then leading from the front, Imtiaz Ali, Love Ajkal, dropping into that riverbed. I think I'm going to watch that movie and look for that scene again. And that is getting reminded of it. And the engagement with government, Singapore Airlines flying an empty plane with the required equipment, which was required for your innovation to happen within 82 days. I think that is a great thing. I mean, we always keep looking at the government with skepticism, but here is a case where in the toughest of circumstances, I mean, COVID, lockdown, nothing could have been tougher than that. Not even a war could be as difficult to manage as COVID was. And here you found a way to get through the essential supplies. So these are some of the points that I noted for myself, that how this whole structure of promoting entrepreneurship can be done on a much larger scale. As you said, to have a purpose in life, or to be having a purpose for these people, is what's going to make those 45% of the new opportunities that are being sensed by people as a COVID-19 effect. I think we need to all get our hands together and hold hands together really to promote that 45% people who are polled that new opportunities are going to be what they're looking for. So thank you very much for this. I mean, your presentation and your entire talk has been recorded and will be made into a video. I'm sure a lot many people will look at it. We will circulate it to even colleges and other incubation centers, and they should benefit from this particular talk. That's the whole advantage you get of being on Zoom and being on a facility to record. So thanks, Srikant. I think it's a great way to end this season 2. And before I end, before I pass on back to Surajit, I have a small video to play for the entire team of HR at 8 p.m. and others. So all the speakers that came, all the moderators who were there, have all been covered in this small video. Over to you, Surajit, to wind up the session.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bhatnagar. Now I'll request Deepshikha Chakravarti to propose vote of thanks. Deepshikha is basically working with TCS in HR operations. She is a science graduate from Dhanbad Mahila Vidyalaya, and she has done her MBA from Madurai Kamaraj University, Tamil Nadu. She is working with TCS for last, I think, 7 years. I'll request Deepshikha, please propose vote of thanks to conclude this program.
Good evening to everyone present in this beautiful session. And thanks for giving me the golden opportunity of presenting the vote of thanks. I will start with the honorable guest speaker tonight, Mr. Srikant Sastri. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us a wonderful session. It was really engaging. Surajit sir, thank you. Thank you so much for your effort and giving your valuable time. As we all know that today is the end session of the HR 8 p.m., I would like to extend my gratitude to Atul ji for seamlessly and effortless and with full effort, he had been shaping the program throughout with us.
Very good.
We are blessed to have Dr. T.V. Rao, Dr. Akhil Bushrai, who had been continuously motivating and encouraging us. It is my pleasure to thank SunMoksha for providing the pro version of Zoom. I would also like to thank Mr. Anil Kaushik, who had been covering our program through his paper mode, that is business manager. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all our moderators, volunteers, speakers, and participants who had been unlocking their ideas and suggestions and effort. With full effort, they had been supporting a program and giving the shape to the HR 8 p.m. as true India One. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Till we meet again, kabhi alvida na kehna.